Hey guys, Jared here, and today we're going to check out the Inspiron 7577 from Dell and find out how well it performs through a number of benchmarks to help you decide if it's a laptop you should consider. Inside the box we've got the laptop itself, warranty information, and power brick and cable. Dell offer this laptop in a few different hardware configurations, so I'll first cover the specs we're dealing with here. There's an Intel 7700HQ quad-core Kaby Lake CPU which runs at 2.8 GHz and can turbo up to 3.8 GHz. I've got 16GB of DDR4 memory running at 2400 MHz, but the two slots can support up to 32 GB. For storage, there's a 256GB Toshiba NVMe M.2 SSD and a 1TB Seagate 5400 RPM 2.5-inch hard drive installed. For the graphics, there's an NVIDIA 1060 with Max-Q in combination with a 15.6-inch 60Hz IPS 1080p display, and we'll see how this performs later in the benchmarks. As for network connectivity, there's a gigabit Ethernet port on the left which needs to be pulled down to access, and an Intel dual-band wireless AC8265 card for 2.4 and 5 GHz Wi-Fi, with support for Bluetooth 4.2. The laptop has a matte black look to it on the lid with the red Dell logo, while inside it's a matte grey metal, with some red accents around the touchpad matching the keyboard colour. The physical dimensions of the laptop are 38.9cm in width, 27.47cm in depth, and 2.49cm in height. The weight of the laptop will of course differ based on the hardware installed, and Dell lists the starting weight at 2.65 kilos with the 1050 model. While testing this one, I found that it weighed just a little more, at 2.8 kilos. And when including the power brick and power cable for charging, the total increases to just under 3.5 kilos. So it's a little on the heavier side for a similarly spec'd 15-inch laptop. As mentioned, the screen is a 15.6-inch 60Hz 1080p IPS panel. It looks great on all angles. I don't notice any color shift up, down, or side to side. The screen is also anti-glare with a matte finish, which I personally prefer as it helps reduce reflections. I've also had a go at measuring the colors produced by the screen for the first time using the Spider 5, and my results returned 65% of sRGB and 48% of Adobe RGB, so a little on the low side for content creators. I've performed my usual backlight bleed test on the display, which involves having the laptop show a completely black screen in a dark room to help emphasize any bleeding around the edges. I then take a long exposure photo with my camera to help display any bleed. So basically, this is a worst case scenario test. We can see there's some minor bleed along the top in the center towards the right, and a tiny amount down the bottom left, although I wasn't personally able to notice this while using the laptop under normal lighting conditions. This can of course vary from laptop to laptop. While moving the display, there was a little flex, but overall I'd say it felt fairly solid, and this is probably owing to the hinge mechanism which attaches to the base of the laptop in the middle rather than the sides. And the base of the laptop is also heavy enough to allow for one finger opening. Above the display is a 720p camera capable of 30fps video. The camera doesn't look too bad, but it is a little bit grainy, as you should be able to see. I think the microphone actually sounds pretty good, but you should be able to hear that for yourself. The keyboard was pretty nice to type with. The buttons weren't overly clicky, but I found them a little small in general, although I got used to them. The only issue I had was with the smaller arrow keys. All the keys light up red, which matches the other red accents around the laptop, and the brightness of the lighting can be adjusted between two different levels. No RGB here unfortunately, so it's either red backlighting or off. There was almost no keyboard flex at all, even while pushing down fairly hard, thanks to that solid metal body. It feels extremely sturdy, which I'd say is what's contributing to the overall weight. The keyboard is also apparently spill resistant, although I didn't test that one out. The touchpad has a light matte texture to it, and will click down when pressing anywhere, rather than just the left and right button areas. I also found this area to do a pretty good job at hiding fingerprints, at least compared to the black matte lid, where they were more obvious, but nothing a quick wipe couldn't fix. As for the available I/O, starting on the left side we've got a Noble lock slot, power input, Ethernet port, USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A port, and SD card reader. On the right, there's a 3.5mm headphone jack, two more USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A ports, a USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type C port with Thunderbolt 3 support, and a HDMI 2.0 port. The front grille features the speakers towards the left and right sides, and they sound pretty good for laptop speakers. There's a distinct lack of bass, but they sound clear even at loud volumes. The back has the same grille pattern with some air exhaust vents, and overall I kind of like the design. Underneath was very clean, just a couple of air intakes towards the back, and two long rubber feet which extend most of the way along the base and help prevent the laptop from moving around on flat surfaces and also rise it up slightly to help let cool air in. Powering the laptop is a 56 watt-hour 4-cell battery, and initially I was thinking it wasn't going to be enough, but it turned out to be plenty, especially compared to some other laptops at this size I've recently reviewed. With a full charge and doing basic tasks such as browsing the internet and watching YouTube with the screen on around half brightness, keyboard lighting off, and background apps disabled, I was able to use it for exactly 5 hours. While playing The Witcher 3 with medium settings and Nvidia's battery boost set to 30 FPS, the battery lasted for an hour and 23 minutes. Quite impressive, and likely a result of the lower powered Max-Q 1060. During normal use with an ambient room temperature of 22 degrees Celsius, the CPU idled at 36 degrees Celsius, while the GPU idled at 40 degrees Celsius. And here are the external temperatures of the laptop where you'll actually be putting your hands. While benchmarking for half an hour with the same room temperature, the CPU reached a maximum of 91 degrees Celsius, while the GPU peaked at 70. The CPU got fairly warm, while the GPU kept fairly cool in comparison. We can see that the center of the keyboard area towards the back is warmed up a bit more, although this wasn't really an issue in practice as your hands don't sit there. However, the keyboard did feel a little warm. In terms of noise, it ran quieter than other similarly spec'd laptops thanks to the Max-Q graphics. At idle, it sat at the 37 decibel mark and I could barely hear it, and this is what it sounded like. While running my benchmarks and gaming, it went up to 49 decibels, and here's what that sounded like. Most of the other laptops at this size with similar specs I've benchmarked typically range from 52 decibels and higher, so I think we're seeing the cooler and quieter Max-Q 1060 at work here. I also didn't notice any coil whine while testing. Last but not least, let's check out some benchmarks. We'll first cover some real-world gaming benchmarks, followed by tests with various benchmarking tools. I've been saying for a while that the 1060 is a sweet spot for 1080p 60fps gaming at good settings, so I was really interested to see what the cut-down Max-Q version had to offer. In PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, we're almost averaging 60fps at ultra settings, but the 1% lows do drop down quite a bit. Personally, I had a good experience using medium settings or lower, which were able to keep the 1% lows around 60fps. Shadow of War was fairly similar, requiring around high or lower settings to sustain the 60fps average, and interestingly there was very little difference between ultra and very high settings. Battlefield 1 performed well on all levels of settings. Even on Ultra, the 1% lows were only just under 60fps, so you should be able to play this one at max settings no problems. In The Witcher 3, the averages were quite good, but there were some dips as seen by the 1% lows, so you'd probably want to run on high or lower settings with this one, which is fine as the game still looks great. I found Watch Dogs 2 to be fairly resource intensive for laptops, and while we're not really getting high frame rates here, I'd argue that this game doesn't really need it. Even at max settings, it still looked and felt alright, with the 1% lows and even averages not really differing all that much, so might as well have it looking real nice. As for Rise of the Tomb Raider, in general we're usually seeing slightly better performance in DirectX 11 compared to 12, and a 60fps average at max settings is pretty nice. Ashes of the Singularity also generally favoured DirectX 11 in all but the lower settings, where Vulkan and DirectX 12 had a slight edge. Doom once again sat close at the 60fps mark, even for the 1% lows. It played great even at max settings. Ghost Recon is another of those demanding games. You'll probably need to drop the settings down quite a bit in this one in order to get a decent frame rate. Considering we've got a 60Hz screen in the laptop, I think the 1060 with Max-Q is a great match here. As we can see in many of these games, we can play at decent settings around the 60fps mark. Now onto the benchmarking tools. While a useful indicator, note that these results are less practical compared to the real-world gaming results previously shown. This is how the laptop performed in Heaven Benchmark, with the tessellation set to extreme and anti-aliasing set to 8. And this is how Valley Benchmark performed, with anti-aliasing on 8 at various graphics settings. For the last graphics benchmarks, I ran Firestrike and TimeSpy from 3D Mark and got scores of 8,386 and 3,220 respectively. In Crystal Disk Mark, the 256GB PCIe SSD performed around 2,750 MB per second in sequential reads and 400 MB per second in sequential writes. The read speeds were pretty amazing, and made opening programs feel nice and snappy. The writes were a lot slower in comparison, but still decent. The 1TB hard drive gets just under 80 MB per second in both sequential reads and writes, which is about all you'll get from a mechanical 5400 RPM drive. In this exact configuration, the laptop can be picked up from Dell for $2,499 Australian dollars here in Australia, or $1,349 US dollars internationally. However, it is the highest end configuration for the new Inspiron 15 7000 series, so you can save some money by reducing the specs. So what did you guys think of the Dell Inspiron 7577 gaming laptop? Overall, I'm pretty impressed. Compared to other laptops I've checked out recently, it's got great battery life, and the whole thing just feels solid. It's been built really well. Although both of these factors also mean that it weighs a little more. This did surprise me a little, as I expected a laptop with Max-Q graphics to be lighter, as less cooling is required, but it looks like the weight has at least been put to good use. As mentioned, it performs well in games. The 1060 is a great option for 60fps 1080p gaming, and overall it runs fairly cool and quiet compared to non-Max-Q versions that I've tested. So let me know what you guys thought down in the comments, or simply leave a like or dislike on the video to quickly let me know. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for future tech videos like this one.